I'm Will Keough. I was class of 1990 at Lafayette College. I was a biology major and music minor. Campus life in the 80s, I don't think it was necessarily terribly different from a lot of the schools that are similar to Lafayette, but there were only 2,000 students, so it was quite small. Everybody knew each other by and large. But there were also some advantages to that. Because everybody knew each other, you knew your faculty, people watched out for each other. So it was a nice community despite some of the challenges at the time. It wasn't particularly diverse either in terms of sexual orientation or gender identity or socioeconomic status. It was also it had a majority men. We were only about 16 to 20 years into co-education at Lafayette, so we were still figuring that out. There was a big push to have geographic diversity, and part of why I got financial aid and was offered a position here was because I was from Massachusetts, which was a state that, even though close by, was not a state that Lafayette had many students from. So I kind of fit the bill. I wanted to be a science major and participate in the arts, and so I was kind of what they were looking for.
I've actually really tried to think back to when I did not know Will. It's kind of hard. He took my classes in ecology and then in freshwater biology and this limnology class. And I recruited him as a TA because he was just so interested and engaging.
It became not only a mentorship, but also a friendship that, as you can see, has lasted for many years now.
In the 80s, Lafayette was a completely different institution. When I was first hired here as a one-semester sabbatical replacement, there was absolutely no theater whatsoever. So gradually, bit by bit, semester by semester, I started teaching theater courses, introduction to acting, and that's when I met Will, when I first directed the Canterbury Tales, which was the first show over at the Williams Center when we had just built it. And I got my friend Nancy from the biology department to choreograph it. She was magnificent, and she went and pretty much grabbed Will, who was one of her students, by the collar and said, "You're doing this," and hauled him into the entire experience as well. There was no atmosphere for students who were gay in the early 80s at Lafayette. That's not, of course, to say there weren't gay students, because of course there were.
So yeah, being closeted in the 80s, well, I think most of us were. It was very few of us who were brave enough to be out, and I think it was the times and also sort of the nature of the college. You know, well, what we now know as HIV, it was called the gay cancer or the gay disease in those days, was first described in 1980 and 1981. It took 4 or 5 years to even know that HIV was the cause of this disease, and it was a virus. And I think it affected a lot of us who were early Gen Xers, I guess. There was also sort of threats of violence. I mean, I used to receive, instead of what were invitations to rush parties or looked like them for fraternities and sororities, they were actually, on several occasions, threats of violence if I dared to show up. And I wasn't out. I didn't have any sort of intimate relationships with anybody, quite frankly, at that time. So it was all kind of shocking and hard, and you didn't know where to go to. And again, that guilt about not realizing that there were people who would have supported you if you let them know. I mean, I've talked about it since then with all of them, and you know, through that there's always healing and understanding. But you know, I still carry a amount of guilt that I didn't feel like I could share that with certain people. I mean, I was pretty darn lucky, and at times didn't fully recognize, because I was so scared from the threats of violence, and it wasn't just here, it was nationwide and in other venues, and the fear of being rejected, the fear of not being able to continue my career. I knew I wanted to be a pediatrician, and you know, there's a lot of people who still to this day equate being gay with being a pedophile, which you can imagine wanting a career in pediatrics could be found challenging. And so, you know, there was always that fear, and it was kind of by accident that I came out to my family. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but if any kid in America should not have worried about his family's response to coming out, it should have been me. But again, in that my family is so important. I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers who are just the best people in the world. And my parents, obviously, because they gave me those siblings. And it was really them and also my sister-in-law who really helped begin the healing and sort of gave me the courage to sort of admit who I was and live that truth.
You know, I really liked Will and I wanted him to be happy. And so I'm at the computer and I said, so what's happening? Is there anybody special in your life? And he said, oh, Nancy, you know, I've just ended a relationship. And then I said, so what are you looking for? And Will came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. And Will says, oh, Nancy, if he's 6 foot and dark hair, yeah, you can introduce him to me. And it was a good thing he didn't see my face, only because I was just so shocked. But I wasn't shocked. It wasn't a surprise in the sense of Will coming out, but it was, I can't even really put it into words. It was just, okay, I now know something more about Will that will help to make him happy. And I actually was also really very touched that he felt that he could share that with me.
Will has become my poster child for STEAM. STEM goes nowhere without art in the middle, so it's STEAM. And I think Will is a fabulous example of that because he's an actor, he's a musician, he's a thinker, he's a writer, he's a reader, and he's a curious human being who's really kind of the way we want a liberal arts student to be educated, the way we want a liberal arts student to use the education from any place he can get it in order to be better at what he wants to do.
His experience helps to define and give him credibility for understanding and sharing that your journey can be very circuitous and it can go in many different directions, but as long as you're true to who you are and what you want to do, that those dreams can be realized. And I feel very fortunate that he has been such a fixture in my career here at Lafayette.